Good morning. I'm David Plazas, the Director of Opinion and Engagement for the USA Today Network Tennessee and the Tennessean. We have the opportunity today to broadcast a live discussion with Congressman Marsha Blackburn, who is running for the U.S. Senate from Tennessee. This is being broadcast across the state of Tennessee, and we look forward to hearing any comments that you might have to say. But we have a prepared agenda for today, and we have the pleasure of having Congressman Blackburn here in the room. Before we begin with questions, would editorial board members please introduce themselves?
Morning, I am Michael Anastasi. I'm Vice President of News for the USA Today Network, Tennessee.
I'm Maria Deverain, Executive Editor of the Tennessean.
Thank you very much. Congressman Blackburn, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be back with you.
First question we have, tell us who you are, what you stand for, and what misconceptions, if any, there might be about you.
Sure, and thank you for that and for doing this and for everyone who is joining us. This is one of the questions people will ask me so often out on the campaign trail, and they will have heard different things, but they want to know a little bit about my bio. And I grew up in South Mississippi. I grew up on a small farm, and my mom would always say we were a good 4-H club, Farm Bureau, Southern Baptist Church, and Republican Party family. And my dad sold oil field production equipment, and my mother called herself a professional volunteer. She would always say, there are two things we have to do: give back more than you take and leave things in better shape than you found them. And my dad would say he made the living and she made it worthwhile. And we were very involved in our community and in our church. I went to college on a 4-H club scholarship. And while I was there during that freshman year, I realized that that was not going to pay for college. So my brother had this great summer job, and he loved doing it. He worked with a company out of Nashville. And at that point, I had never been to Nashville, but he would leave home during the summer and sell books in another city with a team of people. They would leave college, come here to Nashville for their sales training, and then go somewhere else and sell books. I thought, that is the job I want. He would work a minimum of 80 hours a week. He would work on straight commission. And for a young female who thought, you know, I don't have a lot of options for a summer job. This was in the 70s. And this was so appealing to me. So I talked my brother into recruiting me, and he did. And then we found out that the Southwestern Company didn't let you recruit women, that there were not women that went away on the sales teams. So I found myself at 19 years of age breaking a barrier. And I talked them into letting me sell. They made me live at home that first summer. And I did really well. The next year I recruited other women who were in school with me at Mississippi State. We came to Nashville for our training, and then all the women had to go back and live home and sell books there. And we did really well. And I became a sales manager for the Southwestern Company, and there again, helping to break barriers, establish a women's division. And I will tell you, I stay in pretty close touch and have been a part of continuing those friendships and relationships with that company. After I married another sales manager from the Southwestern Company, they had a nepotism rule, and I had to give my job up. At that point, I went to work with the Kastner Knott Company, which was located here over on Church Street, and I ran retail promotions and special events for all 13 of their stores. That was here in Middle Tennessee and Southern Kentucky and Northern Alabama. And then as my family grew, I hung out my shingle and worked as an independent contractor, sole proprietor, doing marketing and spending a lot of time volunteering in the community. I did a good bit of volunteer work with arts organizations and healthcare related organizations. working to help establish our church, Christ Presbyterian Church, working in Brentwood and Williamson County. You know, we got a library started in Brentwood. That was a fun project to do. I also served as chairman of the Republican Party there, and good people that served with us as we were establishing Young Republicans, and then as I moved into the role of chairman of that county party. And following much of that community service and nonprofit service, ran for the state senate, won that seat, and then led the opposition to a state income tax here in Tennessee. That was really a 4-year battle, and the people of the state truly gathered around that issue and with me as we together fought against imposition of a state income tax. And then, of course, our state legislators, and I was just with a couple of them earlier this morning, led that fight to keep our state forever state income tax free. And they pushed forward a resolution, and the people of the state voted on it in 2014 and amended the state constitution. So we'll never have a state income tax here. When I went to Congress in 2003, I immediately started working on restoring the ability of Tennesseans and others in non-state income tax states to deduct the local and state sales tax that we pay every year from our federal income tax filing. I was successful in that effort, and our late Lieutenant Governor John Wilder, who was somebody that I was close with, he was a wonderful mentor to me during my time in the state senate. And Lieutenant Governor Wilder would call and he would say, "It's worth $1 billion in the pocketbooks of Tennesseans." And it was the largest tax cut that Tennesseans had ever received. And it was an honor to work with some of my House and Senate colleagues, Democrat and Republican, people that came from non-state income tax states, and to lead this effort and push it through and restore that ability for Tennesseans to deduct that tax. Chuck and I have 2 grown children and 2 grandchildren, and of course we think that they are wonderful, perfect, you know, the best. And we have been right there in Williamson County, still really involved in the community, and appreciative that we have been able to participate in the community life. The reason I left Mississippi was for a job, and that company was here, and it's one of the reasons I'm so interested, primarily interested in economic development and economic growth and preserving that American dream. My parents have 3 children. All 3 children left home because they were seeking better opportunities. And when we grew up and started our careers, there were not jobs and availability of jobs. So what we had to do was go to where the jobs were. And one of my goals has been, how do we make certain that we are building a community that is going to be that generational community, that there are going to be jobs for our kids and our grandkids, so that they're going to be able to pursue their version of the American dream.
Well, thank you very much. And at this time, the Trail Board members are going to be alternating questions. And we'd like to ask Michael if you could ask our first question under general, and then we'll alternate from there.
Actually, I want to take us out of order here to get you to talk about a little in more detail something you just touched on, which is how you had to go to where the jobs were. Let's talk a little bit about healthcare and
Sure.
the closures of hospitals that we've had
Yes.
in rural areas and the condition of our rural economy in Tennessee in general. Could you provide your assessment of the rural economy and what you think that you can do to help improve it moving forward?
Absolutely. And the Tennesseans that I have represented in Congress, I have 19 counties, and that is primarily a rural area. And staying in touch with these county mayors and the town and city mayors and their elected officials is something that is a part of my everyday work. And one of the things that has been a holdback for them is access to high-speed internet. And we have seen this, you know, you can, Michael, when you look at, let's take two counties, Hickman County, and I think that 40% of the residents there don't have access to high-speed internet. Humphreys County, I think it's teetering right around 50. And even though as a state, we are now at probably less than 20% having access to high-speed internet, what we see is a high concentration in some of those areas. And our mayors in the rural counties and towns have said that that is their #1 infrastructure issue. Now, our electric power co-ops, our local exchange carriers are working diligently in filling that gap. And this is one of the reasons I have focused so steadily over the last 5 years on this issue. You cannot have access to a 21st century economy, 21st century healthcare, or 21st century education without access to high-speed internet. And closing that digital divide is an imperative. And this is why we have had Ajit Pai, who is the FCC commissioner here. It is why you have seen me push forward with grants into the Rural Utility Service, the RUS. And some of our local exchange carriers are getting those grants. They're also getting FCC grants. It is also why you've seen me put emphasis on funding into the FCC's Rural Health Care Fund. And because we have to do that to make certain that they're going to have that access. One of the counties that I represent, the mayor had come to me and he said, Marsha, we thought we had a great economic development prospect. They were ready to go. And then they found out that we did not have access to the amount of bandwidth that they needed. And they were going to, you know, you could look at the speeds, the megabits down, and then the upload. They needed it for some backhaul. And so they lost this economic development opportunity. I talk to parents all the time that will say, you know, the kids get home from school, they take the bus home, we do chores, and then we drive, we go back into, we have supper, and then we go back to town so that they can get a signal and get Wi-Fi and can submit their homework.
No doubt that access
so
is crucial. Do you think those employers will come to the state or to those rural counties with access to broadband but without access to health care?
The healthcare issue ties right in with the technology issue. And keeping those rural hospitals open is something that is important. And then helping these communities work around. Great example is McNairy County. They lost their hospital. What we have been working on post that closure is how do you change the rule with CMS, which is the Center for Medicare Medicaid Services, so that you can have freestanding ERs in these counties so that they still have that access to emergency health care. And we are in process of working on that right now. And we thought it was going to be an amended rule. Now it looks like they're going to do a new rule that is going to be specific to rural hospitals, because there needs to be that ability for them. A second thing, one of the things that helps them is healthcare technology, so that they have remote monitoring, telemedicine. This is the reason that I led the bipartisan work on the Software Act, and I led that initiative. I was successful in getting the Software Act, which puts in place the definition, I think we've talked about this before, of healthcare technology and healthcare data, and will allow reimbursement for that activity. But I was successful in getting that through the House, and then we folded it into 21st Century Cures, and Senator Alexander finished it in the Senate, and President Obama signed it into law. And that allows more options for our rural hospitals and our clinics. You know, we have over 200 community health centers in the state, and they're a wonderful avenue for helping to get healthcare access, but it's not that access to emergency care, which you would get from a hospital. So, yes, we're very much engaged in trying to make certain that there is that healthcare, because you're exactly right. It is a vital component of having economic development in these communities.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about economic development, can you share with us your views on the tariffs that are coming into place now? And can you give us some specifics on how they're either helping or hurting the Tennessee economy in your view?
Yeah, absolutely. And I am not a fan of tariffs, never have been. I am one who is for free and fair trade. And you've probably heard me say more than once that as a conservative, I support free people, free markets, and freedom. And I think that that is just such a solid component with me. On the tariffs, we have been engaged, believe it or not, since last fall with Tennessee companies that we're seeing this, whether it's appliance manufacturers, auto manufacturers. Of course, we've got chemical producers. We have farmers that are very much engaged. I had the opportunity, I was down in West Tennessee on Saturday and met with some folks that are farming, very concerned about soybeans and the soybean market, and we are also. And much of what I've done is to advocate for them and to be in that mix, staying in regular contact with the administration as they have voiced concerns to me, taking them directly to the administration, getting them in touch with individuals in the administration. Pardon me, one of our farmers Saturday was talking to me about an issue, and I took that information so that I can appropriately advocate for them. But then I encouraged them to reach out to someone else that they had to get it on their radar. I think it's important for us to realize China has had a trade war on us for decades. And we know that they have had a trade war on us. And if we're in a war, we better win this thing. I hope we get past this talk of tariffs soon. It is not serving. You look at the soybean producers, the cotton producers, and that cotton crop, they're pulling that in, and they are very concerned. Corn, I talked last week with someone who is a big corn producer. They expressed their concerns with what they have. I've met with some that do beef cattle. They also have some concerns. We're watching it and advocating every day for these individuals, but I hope we resolve this and that we put the focus on trade agreements. I had early on in this discussion, one of our farmers said, you know, Marsha, we don't want aid, we want trade. And they are really hopeful that with Mexico having reached an agreement, with Canada being close, the EU being in discussion, and China coming forward with trying to set a time to discuss in the next couple of weeks, they are incredibly hopeful that they're going to get new markets. That's what they want. And we know that Tennessee farmers are the best in the world, and we want them to have those new markets.
Do you think there's a danger we'll lose access to the markets that we have in China longer term as this plays out?
My hope is that we do not. And I am pleased that Secretary Mnuchin is taking the lead on this work. He and Larry Kudlow are taking the lead on this work with the China talks. And we're going to continue to advocate. We're going to continue to encourage that they finish this quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You've had many leadership positions in your role in the House, Congressman, and among them you led the House Investigative Panel on Infant Lives.
Mm-hmm.
We've had your office discussions about that, and the work has been concluded.
Yeah.
Could you tell us what were the findings of this particular committee?
Right, and we were tasked with just getting those findings, and then our activity as we turned it over to DOJ was to issue the criminal referrals from the work that we found. Some of those were to states, some were federal referrals and did go to DOJ. Last December, I was notified that DOJ and the FBI have taken up all 15 of those criminal referrals. It is illegal to harvest and sell body parts, these fetal body parts. And there is a portion of federal code that clearly states that you cannot enter into a contract and sell and make even 1 penny of profit. And so turning that over to DOJ and FBI and allowing them to now do their investigation is what we did. What we did find was that there were some abortion clinics that had entered into contracts with some of these body part sellers. We know that that practice has ended. I am glad that that practice has ended. And as someone who is pro-life and believes in that right to life, I think that when we see this type of activity, calling it out, making certain that it is appropriately investigated, and then that the findings of that committee are turned over to the appropriate entities was the work that we were tasked to do by a House resolution, and we completed that task and completed it on time.
Okay, switching back to the economy if we could.
Sure.
How do you believe the tax cuts have benefited Tennesseans, and are they being offset by increasing rate of inflation?
The tax cuts have benefited Tennesseans because they are seeing more money in their pocket. And that is a good thing. The average is somewhere between $1,700 and $2,000 a year for a family, and that is a really good thing. It is not crumbs. Tennesseans don't look at that amount of money and call it crumbs. They do look at that amount of money and like we do and say, you know, that could be a new washer or dryer or freezer, or our grandsons always are looking for UT football tickets. So those are not crumbs. They're benefiting by having more money. It's like this guy at the Mule Day this year came up and told me, he said, Marsha, you know, tax cuts are working for me. He said, and I used to have too much month at the end of my money. Now I've got a little bit of money at the end of the month. And people appreciate having that extra money. Now, in addition, what people are seeing is rising wages, and that is a great thing. I was talking with a restaurant owner last week who has 7 restaurants, and they've gone from paying $15, $16 an hour to $21, $22 an hour. And their point was, how do we make certain that we keep our employees? We've also talked to people who are hiring additional people, and the wages for their existing employees are going up. companies that are growing and companies that are expanding. And these are not just big companies. You know, everybody heard about the bonuses that were given by Tennessee companies, some of the banks and people like McKee Foods over in the east part of the state, or FedEx in Memphis that gave bonuses. But a lot of our Main Street businesses that were able to give a bonus or were able to grow and are now expanding. You go into some of our smaller towns and you see people that are going in and fixing up something on the town square and opening a business or opening a restaurant, and that's the effect that it has. So you're seeing economic activity up and down the system. You look at our unemployment rate. We are basically at full employment. You look at the GDP growth and where we are with that at 4.2%. This has an impact on the pocketbooks of Tennesseans, on the lives of Tennesseans every single day. So we would love to move forward with Tax Cuts 2.0, make these cuts permanent so that people have that certainty that they can have for planning. How many times do you all have reporters that go out and they're doing an interview and you know, maybe it's over in Kingston Springs or maybe it's up in Portland, and they're talking to somebody and they want to know that there is going to be stability in the tax code. They want to be able to plan not just for this year and next year, but for 5 years from now and 7 years from now. So getting to Tax Cuts 2.0, making those permanent, also beefing up options for educational and retirement savings accounts, and giving individuals, letting there be more options. Another savings account option, the universal savings account. Looking at ways to put more opportunities for tax savings for entrepreneurs and innovators and new start businesses. With the amount of growth that we have here in Tennessee, that is a really great opportunity. I was at Memphis Bio 2 weeks ago and visited with a couple of companies there. Because of the tax cuts, they're growing. They would like to have some certainty. You think about companies like that, and if you had additional opportunities for them to save money through the tax code provisions for entrepreneurs and innovators, there is no telling what all they would be innovating and coming up with. And you've got companies that are working in our state in agribio. You have companies that are working in healthcare. You have companies that are working in healthcare technology, financial service technology, logistics management, and all of these different opportunities that are here for these young innovators who are seeking to come up with next applications that they are going to be able to utilize with broadband and high-speed internet.
You had mentioned the importance of pocketbook issues, and I wanted to talk with you a little bit about your support for the songwriters. I think
Yes.
we've seen the Music Modernization Act go through the House, but
Right.
it's had some difficulty in the Senate. So if you're elected, what would you do to renew those conversations?
Absolutely.
And try to get it through?
And we continue to work with the songwriters on this. Indeed, when I went to Congress, I started the Songwriters Caucus. And that has been such an effective avenue for helping to educate my colleagues on the importance of intellectual property rights and fighting against China, who has been the big bad actor when it comes to infringing on the intellectual property rights of our creative community that is so vitally important to our state. And I think you and I have discussed, Maria, the tax change I did for songwriters that allowed them to pay cap gains instead of ordinary income tax when they sell a catalog. That was the second bill I got passed. when I went to Congress. So that made a difference in how songwriters were able to be treated. It was a fairness issue in the tax code for them. And then Jerry Nadler out of New York and I have worked together on making certain that fair pay, fair play, that moves forward. So, and that deals with your broadcast issues, and we're very close to finishing that, just as the Music Modernization Act, as we look at the digital economy and making those changes. You're right. After 5 years of work, we got that one out of the House, and now Senator Alexander and Senator Hatch are leading on that over in the Senate. We do anticipate that they're going to have this finished. I think they probably will finish their work, and we will conference out the differences very quickly, and you will probably see us probably right after the election move forward with getting that to the president's desk. This is so important for the music community, and not only your songwriters, but your performers, your music publishing businesses. Everybody over on Music Row wants to get the Music Modernization Act done. And I noticed in the paper yesterday, Bart Herbison and the Songwriters Chair were honored by the Chamber for the work that they have done on protecting intellectual property and music modernization. And I have to tell you, the NSAI has worked so diligently on this and has worked so closely with us, as have all of the publishing houses. These songwriters will come into D.C. They bring their guitars, they come in, they meet with individuals, and whether it was tax fairness, fair play, fair pay, or music modernization, the Nashville music community has been on the ground and working for this. And getting these changes in law is a team sport, and they have really been a great team player on it. And we think that it's, and it also affects, let me say this, not just a country music or contemporary Christian music. It affects a lot of the gospel. It affects a lot of our church musicians that record out of here. Of course, symphonic music. You have more symphonic music distributed out of here than anywhere else. So for all of our musicians who live and work here, this is something that is vitally important. Sometimes I'll be sitting in church and I see them all up there and they're playing, as we get ready to start the service, and the praise music is being done. I thought, every one of these guys, every one of them deserve to be paid for the product that they're producing and is enjoyed around the globe.
You appeared on a recent Grand Divisions podcast. We appreciate that greatly.
Oh, sure, yeah.
You talked about President Vladimir Putin of Russia, and if I recall correctly, you called him a thug.
Yeah.
The messages that we're hearing from the White House are a little bit different, at least from the president, about what kind of relationship we have with President Putin. How would you use your influence to persuade perhaps the president of your position, and should you have a directly confrontational relationship with Russia?
I have to tell you, I think he is a thug. I think you look at Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, those 4 countries, and David, I think that's your axis of evil right there. And you look at those 4 countries, and you have to say, what in the world are they trying to do to us? Whether it is from the military side, the diplomatic side, you look at the cyber warfare that some of them carry out. You understand the economics of this, and I think that is what I term your new axis of evil. I remember sitting in a 4-H club meeting when I was a kid growing up, and we, as all youth organizations, you have speakers who are there to inform you. And we had a speaker that came to talk to us about communism and the goals that the communists had for taking over America. And I kept that sheet of paper with those goals for years. I was cleaning out something not too many years ago and saw it even yet again. And that impacted me so, that there were people that wanted to do away with our freedoms, that wanted to change our country, and felt like we would incrementally walk that way. And that was horrifying to me, absolutely horrifying to me, because I was growing up in a family and in school and hearing about being able to live the American dream, and how dare there be people that wanted to take that away. So this is something we ought not to be surprised that Russia has tried to meddle in things. They've been trying that for decades and decades. And what we need to do, though, is know that they're a bad actor, and then say, how do we make certain that we protect ourselves from this bad actor and from any ill intent that they may have? You know, not let them attack us, whether it is economically or diplomatically, cyber. Just be certain that we protect our defenses. You know, and on the cyber side, when you talk about our critical infrastructure, and I don't know, I'm sure you all are aware, up at Oak Ridge, they have the Department of Energy cyber project that is up there. And they're always looking at our critical infrastructure and how to protect that critical infrastructure. And see, this is, whether it's our financial systems or our grid or any of our other critical infrastructure, I think that we have to realize these are bad actors. They do not wish us well. And we have to do everything we possibly can to protect ourselves.
Well, there have been a lot of concerns expressed about China in recent years in a variety of ways. I'm not sure I've heard anyone refer to the Chinese as evil. I'm wondering if you can expand on that point a little bit. Is China an enemy of the United States or a potential trading partner?
China wants to be a world economy, and that is something that we know. We have lots of Tennessee companies that do business with China. I think that one of the best things that I can do to be helpful is to make certain that China respects our rule of law, that they respect our intellectual property rights, and thereby that our U.S. companies are going to be treated fairly in this. We know that China has had a trade war on us for decades. We know that China has ripped off intellectual property, whether it is someone who is making a guitar, someone who is creating an album, somebody who is making ink pens to write with. We know that the Chinese are very gifted at reverse engineering, and that they have done a lot of work to try to steal our intellectual property. As we have worked on these issues to protect our creative community and our innovators, we have worked closely with the Chamber. Indeed, the Chamber recently endorsed me in this race. They feel like that in this race I'm the best candidate for supporting business. And critical to that is making certain that Tennessee creators and Tennessee producers and Tennessee innovators are going to be compensated for their works and for their property rights, and that those are going to be recognized and not stolen from them.
Thank you.
Switching gears slightly, we recently had a story that said 100 people a day are moving to Nashville and to the Middle Tennessee region. So we know that there is an infrastructure transportation issue in Middle Tennessee that we have not been able to solve yet. But on a larger scale, I think Senator Corker had recommended at one point gas tax to help rebuild roads and bridges and infrastructure nationally. So would you support that effort, or is there another way we should tackle some of not only the local and regional transportation issues, but the broader national infrastructure needs?
Right. And when you talk about infrastructure needs in our state, as I said, broadband for a lot of our rural communities is the number one issue. And then you also will hear about the surface transportation and the roads and bridges. Pardon me, I was talking to a road builder last week, and they reminded me that when Phil Bredesen was governor, he drained the road fund, and that has slowed down progress on meeting some of the expectations that new arrivals in our community, and we're delighted to have them all here. Tennessee's the best place to come and live and work, and you don't have a state income tax, and never will. And so we welcome them and are glad that they're here. We are concerned about what's going on with transportation. I think that a proposal that has been put forward by the House, Chairman Schuster has something that is very thoughtful. And what he is saying is, as we look to how you keep the trust fund whole at the federal level, that what we need to do is have a group that is given a defined period of time. They would act like a special committee, and it should be stakeholders, legislators, local and state elected officials to come together and look at the gas tax, look at what is happening with natural gas as a transportation fuel, look at the impact of electric vehicles, the EVs. And last year when Tennessee went through their process on the gas tax, they chose to do, I think it's a $200 a year fee on the EVs. But to make it a true user fee so that everybody is paying. And Michael, you're from New Mexico, right?
I am.
You're from New Mexico, okay. And you look at oil-producing states that are also producing natural gas. And you know that those opportunities for that as a transportation fuel. Some of the work on natural gas engines for city buses, for industrial fleets, some of that work's being done right here. And so what you want to do is look at how you handle these user fees. Do you need to look at miles driven? Ask that question. Do you need to continue with a carbon fuels tax? Should that include natural gas? And find a balanced way that is going to be fair so that our roads and bridges are going to be safe when you look at surface transportation. Now, I give the state legislature and our governor a tremendous amount of credit. They completely refilled the road fund. They have spurred some of the road projects, and they're getting those done. You can get on I-40, whether you're heading east or west, and you're going to see plenty of orange and white barrels that are out there. And these lanes are being widened, and they need to be. It's a safety issue, and it is also an issue with the amount of logistics that we have, the amount of heavy truck traffic that we have coming out of Memphis on I-40 and then going different directions once it gets here into Middle Tennessee. That is something worthy of consideration. But I do think that the proposal the House is working on is something that's the right step. I was in Collierville on Saturday, and somebody came up to me and thanked me for the work that I had done on 385 and getting that connected from 240 back over to 40. And when I represented a part of Shelby County and knew that need, we put a lot of effort into that. And but they talked about how significant that was to the growth of that corridor of Shelby County and Fayette County, and that importance.
Thank you.
One quick housekeeping thing. Viewers are asking that we speak into our microphones, so I'm going to set the example right now and ask you a question related to veterans. You represent Fort Campbell in your district, and we received a question from our colleague Chris Smith from the Leaf Chronicle in Clarksville, who is asking about the long delays in veterans getting an appointment at the VA. What is happening to address that, and what can you do about it if you're elected senator?
Yes, and first of all, Phil Rowe, who is one of our Tennessee delegation members, chairs the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and he grew up in Clarksville and served with the 101st. And then moved to East Tennessee to practice medicine, and has ended up in Congress, and now he's chairman of the Veterans Affairs. And he has been a bulldog on working on this issue and has really shepherded the Mission Act through. The long waits continue to be a source of frustration for all of us. As Chris knows well, we have a military retiree spouse, and we have a former battalion commander who are each in our office there in Clarksville, and every single day we work hand in hand with these veterans. We have a military retiree who is also in our Franklin office. We have so many veterans in our area, and it is paramount that we keep that obligation to them. And for them to have to wait when there is a significant need, it is inexcusable. It is actually the reason that the choice program came about. And I was meeting with a group of veterans up in Clarksville, and they were expressing their frustration with the VA. And I took that issue back and found out other colleagues had the same issue with the VA in their districts. And out of listening to individuals and listening to Tennesseans and others listening to people that they represented is how we came up with saying, okay, if the VA can't get to you in a certain amount of time, you get to go wherever you want to go in order to help get that care that you so vitally need. And we really wanted to make certain that they did not have to wait. Now, the Mission Act expands that. Where I think this is going to eventually head as you look over the next 5 years, 10 years, is that as individuals retire from full-time military service, then what they will do is have the option of going into the choice program immediately. It saves them from having to do the paperwork, because some of the paperwork they have to handle when they can't be seen by the VA, and then they want to go outside, then you put the burden on them to do all of this paperwork. And in my opinion, that's not fair. That's not right. So what we would like to do is give them that option where they can go wherever they would like to go and be able to show that VA card and receive the care that they need. And so many of our veterans choose to go back to their hometown and maybe into a family business or onto their family's farm and farming operation. and they don't want to live close to where there is a VA. You know, think about it right now. We have people around the state, and certainly here with the Nashville VA, you have individuals that may be driving 120, 130, 140 miles. And sometimes that veteran has to have somebody take off work and bring them up here in order for them to make that appointment. And for much of the day, they're waiting. So we continue to intercede, to push, to look for ways to expand choice and options for the veterans so that they are not left waiting. The reform efforts, the president had promised he would make that something that was a focus. He has kept that promise with the Mission Act and pushing forward.
We have about 10 minutes left. Michael?
Yeah, and perhaps even a little less. So continuing on healthcare there, and speaking into my microphone, you've talked about increasing access for veterans. What about the rest of the population?
Yes, and the right question to ask in my mind is, how do we make certain that all Tennesseans have access to affordable health care? One of the things that we know is that the ACA has driven up the cost of health insurance 176%. It has priced a lot of people out of the healthcare marketplace. And I run into individuals all the time who will talk about how they feel like they've been priced out. I was in the grocery store one day and ran into a mom, a single mom, 3 kids, and she had been placed on in the marketplace. She could get a subsidy. It still was going to cost her more. She did it anyway, and then found out it didn't cover a lot of the things that she needed. So the insurance is too expensive to afford. It is too expensive to use. And that is why last year you had 160,000 Tennessee families have to write a check out to the federal government and cover a penalty because they couldn't afford to buy a product that they couldn't afford to use. And so they had to pay that IRS penalty. And it may have been $500, it may have been $2,500. But the thing that I think is so egregious in this debate is that 100,000 of those families, 100,000 of those families had joint household incomes of $50,000 or less. So you've got that many families, 100,000 families, and their joint household income is $50,000, and they are writing a check because they couldn't afford to buy something. Now, we have, I think currently it is 16 counties in the state where an ACA compliant plan is not even offered. And this is one of the reasons that I have pushed forward on a solution that says if nothing is offered, then the IRS cannot fine you. Because we do not want those families having to pay a fine when there's not even anything that is offered. Senator Alexander has another portion of that bill, and his legislation says that if nothing is offered, you can use your subsidy to buy something, the closest thing that is offered. And those are 2 common sense solutions to affordability of health care. Other things that we can do, and I know David's probably going to roll his eyes at me on this one, a cross-state line purchase of health insurance. I've been talking about this one for years because I've worked on that. That is such a solution, and I've worked on it for years. But what it will do is open up that health insurance marketplace so that individuals can buy something that suits their need at a price that they can afford. And that's what you want. And when it comes to healthcare access, making certain that our communities, that we are taking steps to keep these hospitals open, to make certain that there are emergency rooms that are available, that our community health clinics are funded and staffed so that people can get that information that they need right there in their community. And circling back to the veterans, there is a provision that many of us have talked about is with allowing in our rural communities veterans to use that community health clinic rather than having to drive to get to the veterans clinic. It is easier for them, and it is easier for them to have access to that. It means they don't have to get people to take a day off and get them there, you know, and it is closer than a VA hospital or a VA clinic, and utilizing those community clinics in a different way. So we look forward to that.
I think we have time for one more question on a close.
We will. No eye rolling, by the way. Just the proposal.
No eye rolling. Okay. I've talked about it for so long. I just, yeah.
So you may be aware that we have a campaign called Civility Tennessee across the state, and I wanted to ask you in two-part question. Number one, do you commit to being civil during this campaign? And that means modeling that behavior and also calling out uncivil behavior. And number two, when it comes to transparency in what they call so-called dark money, how will you help create more transparency, which was the promise of Citizens United?
Yeah. As you know, I always believe that good policy is informed by respectful, robust political debate. And last year, last fall, I was honored by the Ripon Society with the Roosevelt Award for bipartisan accomplishment. And there is a way to do that, and I am always going to be willing and encouraged by anyone that wants to have a conversation with me about how you make the life better for Tennesseans. And I invite those conversations and seek those solutions. And I was really honored and humbled to be honored by the Ripon Society with that award. I think that when it comes to campaigns, I've got lots of good things to talk about. Things that we are working on, what Tennesseans want to see in their next U.S. Senator, and that is our focus, is getting our message out. Now, will we draw differences on public policy differences? Yes, indeed. Absolutely. But drawing a difference on a public policy does not mean that you need to go into personal attacks. And so we are going to run a respectful, robust campaign. And at the end of the day, on November 6th, we're going to win this race.
And with the dark money question?
When you're a candidate, you don't have any say in that. You know, what we have, as we look at legislation, the provisions are there that oversee that. But that is not something that candidates have any participation. You're barred from having any participation there.
Congressman, we want to thank you very much for your time. Any final word before we conclude?
I will just thank everybody who has joined Facebook Live and has streamed along with this. Thank you, and I would ask for your vote to represent you as Tennessee's next senator.
I want to thank the viewing audience across the state of Tennessee. For this broadcast, we'll be having more candidate interviews with Governor Bredesen, with Mayor Dean, and also with Mr. Lee throughout this week. And thank you again, Congressman Blackburn, and thank you to editorial board members Michael Anastasi and Maria DeVarine. Have a good day.